Good evening, everyone. I want to welcome you to the Saturday class series at LaRouche PAC. I'm Susan Kokinda. I'll be your host. And tonight, Brian Lance will be presenting the third of a three-part series on Lyndon LaRouche's economic discovery and breakthroughs. I do want to point out to people that this will be the last class of the year, since next Saturday is Christmas and the following Saturday is New Year's Day. So we certainly hope to see you all in 2022 again. But I think that's a good starting off point in terms of recognizing where we have to go in the political battle before us in 2022, because clearly we all know this will be a year of decision. Whether through the electoral process, we are going to be able to reclaim large parts of our government at the federal and the state level is the immediate task before us. And I think it's useful to review, in a sense, the state of the battle, because I think with the political army which has amassed itself in the fight for our republic, a political army which our enemies have definitely taken note of. I referenced in our Monday discussion here that the Atlantic magazine had a very hysterical article, multi-thousand word hysterical article about the growth of Trump's movement. And while most of it was just the fevered rehashing of their claims of a coup and insurrections and so on, they did let the cat out of the bag at one point when they said Donald Trump has built the first mass political movement in 100 years. They get it, they know it. And the battle has been joined on many fronts in this war, where I think the battle lines are very clear. And the patriotic movement out there is fighting very effectively in these areas, such as election integrity, such as the fight against the insane totalitarian actions that have been enacted around the pandemic, such as around critical race theory, such as the fight to take the Republican Party out of the hands of the rhinos and the establishment, such as against the Green New Deal and the Build Back Better insanity. These are areas where the battle lines are very clearly drawn and people are very mobilized. But the area where from our standpoint, the battle lines are not yet clearly drawn enough is on the question of economic policy. Not simply from the standpoint of what's wrong. We could spend the rest of the evening discussing what's wrong. We're not going to do that. You're living it. You're living it when you go to the grocery store. You're living it if you're a businessman and you can't get your supplies. You're living it if energy prices are going through the roof and you're not able to actually heat your house effectively this year. But what is so far missing is a very, very clear, principled understanding of what the solution to this crisis is. And that is the sum and substance of what Brian is going to be talking about from the standpoint of LaRouche's discovery in economics. And that is going to be critical in terms of the outcome of the battle for the nation in 2022. So before I turn it over to Brian, I just want to very briefly point to two extraordinary pieces on our website right now, which I think very much get at this, the question of economics from the standpoint of a different language, i.e., it's not the language of money. The two articles on our website are this one here, a very powerful article written by Ian Overton, Are Unvaccinated Lives Unworthy of Life? We are slipping into the space addressed at Nuremberg. And what Ian does in this is he takes the question of how COVID has been politicized and it is being used to implement policies that we hung Nazi doctors and Nazis at Nuremberg for. I cannot recommend more strongly that you read that article, share it, and circulate it. And in a sense, the flip side of that is the article above it written by Mike Steger. More people is the metric. Genocide by any other name is still genocide. And he addresses economics, again, from a very different standpoint, a fundamental standpoint, namely that wealth comes from the human mind, and therefore we need more people. A point which, by the way, Elon Musk recently made when he said that one of the biggest dangers facing mankind is the collapse of fertility rates and that we're not producing enough people. So Mike tackles this question from the standpoint of the sweep of history and concludes, I think very importantly, with extensive quotes from a speech which President Trump gave in January 2020, right before COVID broke out, where he went to the Davos World Economic Forum, to the belly of the beast, and he challenged the oligarchs of the world. Primarily, he challenged their pessimism and planted the flag for optimism because of the unique qualities of what the human mind can do. And as I say, there are extensive quotes at the end of Mike's article from that speech. I'm not drawing a direct connection, but it's very clear that Trump intended to act strongly on the principles embedded in that speech. And everything that has happened since the onset of COVID, the stolen election, and everything we've seen this year is a move by the elites of the world to make sure that cannot break out again. Well, we got news for them. It's going to break out again, certainly if we do our job right. So with that, I want to turn it over to Brian.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Susan. Greetings to everyone out there, and happy holidays. Proceeding right away, we're committed. We're out to win. We're out to re-Americanize the U.S. economy. On our website, if you could put that first slide up, we're about what Lynn also discussed as the reanimation of the U.S. economy. As you read there, globalization has failed. We are calling for a return to the American system of political economy. And in doing so, we're playing the LaRouche card. This is not a bias. This is based on science. The next slide. Lynn's discoveries in economics, his building of a movement to promote those ideas, his 8, I believe it was, campaigns for presidency. Again, not a personal quirk, but 8 campaigns waged to keep before the American people the actual solutions required to the crisis before us. This is what we're about. We began the class series discussing a young Lyndon LaRouche, then in his 20s, coming back from World War II, late 20s, early 30s, taking on debunking Norbert Wiener and the whole concepts of cybernetics and information theory, that essentially machines could replace minds, that economic processes could be linearized into basically sets of linear equations. In taking that apart to prove that to himself, between 1948 and 52, he made a set of discoveries on economics and as well pedagogical means by which to present those ideas. So let me just quote here, just briefly. This is from The Power of Reason, his autobiography. It's just a short couple of sentences. If we can discover what ordering of the creative process of mind predictably leads as a method to repeated advances in productive technology, then that discovered ordering of creative processes is in the world line of perfectible agreement with the laws of the universe. If economic science can pose the problems in those terms of reference, Then the characteristics of the universe as they are reflected in the knowledge of economics science reflect the characteristics of the kind of relativistic physical space in which we exist. He goes on, contrary to commonplace miseducation, there are no simple facts in the universe. There are sense impressions. However, the sense impressions impinging upon us are not the direct determination of what the ingenious consciousness perceives as facts. He goes on to stress that a proper economics can be the queen, in fact, the king and queen of all scientific knowledge, the testing ground of what we know and what we don't know and what we need to discover. Now, counterpose this just briefly to Norbert Wiener. I'll just give a short couple of sentences. We provided more of this background in the first class, but in a very real sense, we are shipwrecked passengers on a doomed planet. Yet even in a shipwreck, human decencies and human values do not necessarily vanish, and we must make the most of them. We shall go down, but let it be in a manner in which we may look forward as worthy of our dignity. I mean, this is the thinking of behind systems analysis, and contrary to that, we're out to create the economic space for the future. The future has to determine the present. The future is not the bleak worldview of Bertrand Russell and Norbert Wiener. It's the optimism of Lyndon LaRouche. What we have to do in the immediate coming years, creating our own economic space, a new economic space, we've got to triple our manufacturing workforce, at least. To do that, that brings it up to only 35% from below 10% where it is now. That's not even up to the levels where we were, say, in 1960. We have to build 200 gigawatts of nuclear power plants. We have to build those just to provide the energy for that tripling of manufacturing jobs, up to the, say, the area of 40 million or so manufacturing workers, skilled, advanced manufacturing workers. Overall, we're going to need 300 or 400 gigawatts of nuclear power in the short period ahead. These are requirements that we're going to have to make, and we can build them. We're going to build our economy. We're going to triple and quadruple steel output. Only 30% of our steel is produced from integrated steel mills, you know, starting from coke and producing ultimately steel, high-grade steel. Otherwise, we're taking scrap metal and recycling it. That's the bulk of our steel production today in the United States, and we import 20% of it. To expand our economy, we're going to have to triple and quadruple this steel capacity. And then, in addition to this, just to mention another facet of this, we're going to have to massively upgrade our workforce and families. We're going to have to move back in the direction very rapidly of single-payer households, where a breadwinner can provide for the family, and therefore one of the parents in a household can stay home and raise those kids and be supported in that process. We're going to have to upgrade that workforce through training programs, mentoring, apprentice, and a space CCC program to take kids that have been kicked to the curb, young men and women, and bring them into the productive workforce in a growing economy. And to drive that, we're going to need that crash fusion energy program to take us to the next level, to the unlimited, virtually unlimited source of energy that fusion energy represents, along with the upgraded space program that was initiated by President Trump. which has to be expanded even further, the Moon Mars project, as a science driver spinning off real results into our US economy. Take the next slide. If we think about where we came from, the American system of economy, Alexander Hamilton is cited by Lyndon LaRouche even in his early autobiography, some 30 years ago. And let's single out this single quote: "To cherish and stimulate the activity of the human mind by multiplying the objects of enterprise is not among the least considerable of the expedients by which the wealth of a nation may be promoted." To cherish and stimulate the activity of the human mind. This is the optimism that LaRouche is expressing in terms of a modern physical economic science. This is the American system policies we have to return to. Computers don't replace minds. Linearization does not produce change, and change is what's required. Development, neg-entropy, not Norbert Wiener's entropic dying universe. So let me turn to a quote from Lyndon LaRouche. This is from 1981. We're not going to get these policies. We're not going to win these policies, these economic policies so essential to the future of our nation. I mean, think about it. Everyone knows we're trying to import because we can't produce, import massive amounts of goods. We're going to run $1 trillion deficit this year in imports over exports. We should be manufacturing. We have a housing crisis. We need housing, particularly starter homes, 1,200 square foot or thereabouts. We're producing only a few 100,000 a year, and so on. So people know these, but our cities are a mess. So to turn this around, this is the most essential task before us, but it's not going to be won without a fight. It's not just Norbert Wiener or something like that. It's not just some kooks in academia or something. Here is Lyndon LaRouche on the controlled disintegration of the U.S. economy. This is December 1981. If you remember, well, I'll just read the quote. It will remind you of the period and what was going on, but the consequences as well, which had been forecast by the economist Lyndon LaRouche. Since President Jimmy Carter and Paul A. Volcker introduced fascist varieties of monetary policies to the Federal Reserve System in October of 1979, it has been the muscle and the bone of the economies, which has been looted as a principal source of revenue to rentier financier interests allied with the British monarchy. If the policies would contribute to this relative increase of power of rentier financier interests against industrial and agricultural entrepreneurial interess, are built into a linear form of global systems analysis model, as is the case in fact, the acceptance of that model as a guide to policymaking is in and of itself an act of global genocide. The proposal to increase and to enforce the payments to rentier financier account while savagely contracting the productive basis for producing means to pay such financial charges is an act of genocide. The proposal to increase and to enforce the payments to rentier financier account while savagely contracting the productive basis for producing means to pay such financial charges is an act of genocide. I repeat, this is exactly 40 years ago. It was published, this is in a paper by Mr. LaRouche published in December of 1981. Now we have the MAGA movement. Now we have the Trump takeover of the Republican Party. We have an entirely new political process in the country. as a mass movement, and that changes everything. But this controlled disintegration, that was the term that Paul Volcker used in a speech he gave in England before taking office at the Federal Reserve. Controlled disintegration of the economy was what was launched in 1981, based on exactly the kind of systems analysis, the linear equations and so forth, that Norbert Wiener, John von Neumann, and so forth were promoting on behalf of the oligarchy. That systems analysis, which we've discussed in the past two classes, denies what is fundamentally human cognition. Information, feedback loops, self-correcting mechanisms, cannot be the basis for policy making for a nation, and even over the long term for any major corporation, significant company. Information decoupled from cognitive thinking, in the decision-making process. This is disconnecting mankind from the critical capacity that men and women have to understand themselves, culture, and understand the universe around them. That's a cognitive process. And we spoke about that in terms of the key of discovery, the key process, the prompting of cognition, of paradox. The first step in cognition and creativity, of course, is to recognize what one doesn't know. I was asked, well, how would you define paradox? Well, I think one good way to define it is when someone disagrees with themselves. When someone finds that they disagree with themselves, they realize that in their own thinking there is something wrong. As Mr. LaRouche put it, it's when the water comes out of the light bulbs. The paradox which requires a hypothesis, a solution that from above. It's not about an induction, deduction. It's a matter of a conceptual leap in terms of a hypothesis. Having a hypothesis, having a discovery, a principle to solve a significant problem is then something that you validate by taking it out to others and discussing it. You can't discover that process that went on to your mind directly, but you can by giving the paradox and the proposed solution. You can help the other person discover for themselves the very creative discovery that you made. The light bulb that went on in your head suddenly goes on in the mind of another person and another person. This is the process by which society develops, makes leaps. And of course, this is what our country has done over the sweep of its history, despite all the setbacks. And this very process of paradox, hypothesis, validation, as LaRouche defines it, this is then the means by which we discovered the method of discovery. We discover the means by which we can discover ever more perfectly. We correct our own way of thinking more broadly, and we think about how to think and how society needs to think. And these are the discoveries. These are the discoveries in culture, in the development of from Handel and Haydn to Mozart and Beethoven and Brahms. It's the process of scientific discovery from Benjamin Franklin's kite experiment with lightning, to electric engines, electric power, the very transmission of electricity that's allowing the Zoom call to occur. These leaps have occurred again and again and again. And so we should have a really a firm sense, a confidence that we can return to this kind of productive, growing, dynamic economy and a dynamic culture once again. Now, in the second class, we covered LaRouche and his movement's counterattack against environmentalism, that there are no limits to growth. And we were at least introduced to the great Russian biogeochemist Vladimir Vernadsky, and a kind of dialogue that occurred between Mr. LaRouche and Vladimir Vernadsky over time and space. Vernadsky is the one of the 2 or 3 leading Russian scientists in Russian history. Certainly, that's arguably the case. Someone that was recognized and collaborated with scientists throughout Europe and elsewhere. But the recognition that the biosphere, that living matter itself, was not entropic, was negentropic, that the biosphere was developing. Living matter in the biosphere was a developing process. It was a space. The biosphere was a space, and the biosphere had come to dominate the much larger non-living space of non-living matter on the planet. And out of the biosphere had come mankind. Mankind with human cognition as a negentropic process of cognitive development. And the distinction which Vernadsky had made and which LaRouche otherwise had filled out, completed, so to speak, was the singular role of individuals. That unlike the biosphere, within the noosphere of man, of cognitive man, the individual becomes a geological force. The individual can transform the world around them. He or she can transform the world around them, whether in the area of statecraft, science, the arts. This unique individual comes forward in the development, the negentropic development of the entire universe. The universe is not a dying universe. The existence of these 3 principles, non-living, living matter, the biosphere, domain of the biosphere, and the noosphere, those 3 existing, simultaneously operating principles in the universe is the universe that we know exists because we exist. We know who we are as human beings, as cognitive, thinking human beings. So now let's turn to the topics that of tonight, and we'll turn to them rather briefly. That is monetarism and globalization. This is the fight. This is part of the fight we have to express what is the natural drive, the natural inclination, the intent of man as man. Monetarism and globalization. Now, most people, I think, certainly on this call, have quite a negative view of globalization and understanding to a significant degree of what globalization has wrought or rotting. So I'm going to spend a little more time on the subject of monetarism. Now, this is not an abstract question. Susan mentioned it already. Inflation. It's galloping along perhaps at a rate of right now maybe 15% overall, if you take into account housing prices and all the rest, energy and so on and so forth. And of course, then we have this hapless, or he presents himself as hapless, Jerome Powell, the chair of the Federal Reserve. Oh, oh, there's inflation. And testifying before Congress, he then announces, well, I guess inflation is not so transitory. It's time perhaps to retire the word transitory in transitory inflation. I mean, keep in mind, Jerome Powell, and former investment banker Dylan Reed, the Carlyle Group, a managing partner in the Global Environmental Fund, etc. This is not some kid wet behind the ears. But suddenly there's no comprehension. Apparently, there was no comprehension of what every American was already seeing, inside that feedback loop at the Federal Reserve. So step back. So we had, this is the storyline. Well, we had loose money, Keynesian loose money, loose money policy that started even before COVID, started massively in terms of a gigantic increase with the 2008-2009 financial crisis and the ongoing bailout that continued thereafter. Okay, well, we had loose money. Well, the monetarists of the Keynesian variety, they promoted those policies. Okay, now we have the other monetarists associated with the likes of Milton Friedman, the late Milton Friedman, who say, well, now we have inflation as a result of this loose money, so now we have to have tight money. Now, what's missing in all this? We're talking about monetarism here. Monetarism as economic theory, as the basis of policy making. Well, first of all, axiomatically, the real economy is nowhere to be found. This is all about mere money. Milton Friedman got his Nobel Prize for applying, systems analysis to monetary policy and quote unquote consumption. Consumption policy. Excuse me, without production, there's no consumption. And more importantly, this concept of monetarism, of money policy, of simply manipulating money supply, creates the very consequences which crash the physical economy. I don't have it here with me tonight, but the Lyndon LaRouche's triple curve is definitely something worth pulling up at this moment and looking at. Not so much to look at the skyrocketing rates of growing financial aggregates, which of course we can see in the stock market and derivatives and all that, and the increasing monetary supply, which of course we've seen. But more importantly, look at that downward curve over time, the collapse of physical inputs and outputs. That's the reality, which has come with monetary policy. Monetarism is I'll say, a linearized system. It is a system of cost-benefit analysis, of systems analysis, of no change. This gave us financialization. Think about it. The money simply goes into the banks. The banks invest in financial instruments, speculating in financial instruments, and nary a dollar of it goes into the real underlying physical economy. This is the underlying reality, is what we've lived with, and which now politically there's a eruption against this decay of the real economy of the United States. This is what requires a return to the American system with LaRouche's economic science, the science of physical economy. It's these crashes in the physical economy, self-feeding processes, these feedback loops, self-correcting mechanisms, so-called, and so forth, that simply sustain, based on computer modeling, 24/7 trading in and out of financial instruments. This is what then crashes. The supply chain crisis is part of that, but crashes the physical economy and leads to the apparent necessity, quote unquote necessity, of fascist genocidal policies to at all costs defend the real economy. And I just want to back up here. This was not, money did not used to play this kind of role. The history of real economic science, going back to the Cameralists in Italy and similar circles in France, they grew out of the Renaissance period and the development of nation states. Economic science was not centered on money. The actual history of monetarism, that simply the money supply and manipulating the money supply, that this is the role of government, and that otherwise the government should just stay out of everything. Well, this has a history. There's a background to this, a backstory to it, and it goes back to Jeremy Bentham, corrupt, debauched figure. I assume you know something about him, but Jeremy Bentham and his hedonistic calculus. He defined, in fact, 32 varieties of pleasure, and if you mix and match, you can come up to something like 10 to the 60th power in terms of possible combinations. This hedonistic calculus that he proposed as the basis for economy and economics and so forth, well, that's a little complicated. Well, along came a gentleman at Cambridge, over there in England, Alfred Marshall, and he's the one that said, well, we don't have to deal with 32, types of pleasure and mix and match and whatnot. I mean, Jeremy Bentham would be if he was, not stuffed there and kept, he's literally stuffed, he's stuffed as a mummy, and he's kept in a cabinet there. I think it's at the University of London. Jeremy Bentham, if he was alive today, would be a real supporter of gender fluidity, among other things. I mean, this is, but Alfred Marshall said, well, we don't have to get involved in any of that ourselves. We can just use money, because after all, with money, you can buy any kind of pleasure you want. And that gave us, Alfred Marshall gave us John Maynard Keynes, and gave us Milton Friedman, through William Stanley Jevons and others, gave us Milton Friedman. There is no future in this economic thinking. It's all simply pleasure and pain, seeking pleasure. It's the fable of the bees of Mandeville and so forth. It's Adam Smith's free trade concepts. This is the enemy of the United States. Monetarism as an economic policy is the enemy of the actual physical economy and the negentropic process of development, which cognition both allows and which is essential and is measurable, as LaRouche quantifies in terms of growing potential relative population density, and increasing utilization, higher rates, ever higher rates of utilizing energy flux density, power, in the production process as actual physical measures of economic development, or non-development for that matter. But the crashing of the economy brought on by monetarism, the eating away, think of the financialization of the U.S. economy. It's cannibalized the underlying real economy. We know it most directly in a term, outsourcing. We could make more money. Somebody somewhere could make more money by shipping all of our production overseas and leaving entire sections of the world economy collapsed. That was the controlled disintegration unleashed in spades by Paul A. Volcker and Jimmy Carter back in 1979, and it's been carried forward since. So this cannibalization process of the real economy. So if you could, Susan, put up the next, it's just a brief quote from Milton Friedman. I want to just underscore this, as opposed to Hamilton here. Here we have it, okay. The object of such controls, wage, price, and credit, controls on wage, price, and credit, in other words, belt-tightening, financial austerity. Oh, we've had loose money, well, now we got to have tight money. Is the restriction of spending on the part of individuals. Such a policy, if rigorously enforced, should restrain a rise in the price level. This policy appears to have been successful in Nazi Germany. That's Milton Friedman. Indeed, Art Laffer has been quoted saying, if you want to prove that Milton Friedman is a fascist, it's easy, quote him. You can also look at the experience of Milton Friedman and his Chicago gang down in Chile and the effects on the economy and the people of that nation. But Maynard Keynes, of course, was no different. Maynard Keynes, in his introduction to his 1936 German edition of General Theory, his major so-called economic work, stated, this is, Hitler had been in power for more than 3 years, almost 4 years. He states, promoting his policy, he states that my concepts were much easier adopted to the conditions of a totalitarian state. This is what he said, here's my book, and really these ideas, these concepts are much more fitting to the state of things in Germany, in 1936. And to come back to Milton Friedman, just to underscore this point of zero economic growth, Milton Friedman actually proposed 100% reserve banking. That is that banks would not lend any money. They have to keep in the bank all the money that is put in the bank, 100% reserves. How would they make money? People would pay the bank to put their money in the bank for safekeeping, a small rate of interest. So banks could continue to make money. Why? Why would he propose such a proposal? I mean, it's reductum absurdum. Why would he propose this? Well, because in his mind, Milton Friedman, this branch of monetary theory, the very extension of any credit ultimately leads to inflation and collapses of the economy. This is very much the line. This is the von Mises, von Hayek. It's the same sort of narrative. So there is better to have no growth than any growth at all. Now, counterpose that. I mean, given this holiday period, we can counterpose this in our minds to It's a Wonderful Life, and how that movie plays out, and the little savings and loan versus the old curmudgeon at the bank. I forget his name, but the savings and loan, which by the way were saved in the Depression by Roosevelt's Reconstruction Finance Corporation, and became the savings and loan system that built much of American housing. This comparison in that movie really gets to what credit is about. Credit is about setting in motion production, new production, the future determining the present. We act now to create the future. Just think of how twisted this has become. I mean, in most people's minds, somewhere in their minds, they harbor this idea, that debt is, taking on debt. That people take on debt to buy what they can't afford. That's the simple rhetoric or mime that has come down to us, a meme that's come down to us, and it's got to be overturned. To restore the American system, it absolutely has to be overturned. As LaRouche would emphasize, credit is the means by which you set in motion the net free energy in the economy, in any point in the production process, the overall economy over time. The production of new net free energy of the system, growth in the economy. Setting that in motion to utilize further requires credit, the extension of credit to direct it to productive ends. That's the role of credit in negentropic development. Now, coming briefly to globalization, and I want to. Robert Ingram has done this series. I think it's now a podcast, as well as the series of articles on LaRouche's Pack, titled "It's Time to Learn Real American Economics." And I certainly encourage you to go there for further reading. But I want to start with a quote on, just to get at globalization and where it comes from, and particularly to address this idea that these promoters of so-called free market economics, of the Friedman, Van Hayek, and et cetera types, are not the American system, and that Hillsdale College is not promoting the American system. Here's a brief quote. Robert Ingram quotes them as well, but just a brief quote here. You can put it up. I think it's the next slide there, Susan. The next one after Little Milton Friedman. Yes, okay. Economic transactions between national bodies who are at the same time the supreme judges of their own behavior, who bow to no superior law, and whose representatives cannot be bound by any considerations but the immediate interest of their respective nations, must end in clashes of power. And this goes on. We cannot hope for order or lasting peace after this war if states large or small regain unfettered sovereignty in the economic sphere. I think you get the point. That economic transactions cannot be subject to sovereign economic decision making. Nation states have to get out of the way of the monetarist, linearized, no change economy. And now what we're talking about here, Van Hayek is saying the global economy. So again, we cannot hope for order or lasting peace after this war if states large or small regain unfettered sovereignty. Regain unfettered sovereignty in the economic sphere. This is exactly what has to be the content of the Trump movement, driven home in the 22 elections, that we require elected officials that are going to defend our national sovereignty and our national economic development in all spheres. So otherwise, I think people have, you can take down that slide, Susan, but I think people know, I mean, globalization, of course, this is the globalization of markets. This is the raw materials, global markets and raw materials. What happens today in terms of oil or gas prices or coal or whatever, these are set on the global marketplace. The global market of derivatives. We've already mentioned, of course, outsourcing, these global supply chains that brought on, was a feature of it. It's not the fundamental cause, but brought on the collapse of supply chains, part of the general physical economic breakdown of the United States. And we cannot leave out the global market of narcotics trafficking, which provides so much liquidity into the global economy, or when I say economy, I'm talking about the financial system, which is totally decorticated and decoupled from the underlying real economy of nations. President Trump, in his speech to the United Nations, stating that he intended to represent the interests of the United States, and he expected every other nation's leaders to represent their national interests. This is the starting point, you know, of making a revolution in international affairs. I would just point out that the explosion of international narcotics trafficking and everything that's come with it, international terrorism and the rest, this was very much promoted by Margaret Thatcher's Big Bang deregulation of the banking system, which totally deregulated the British Commonwealth's global banking system, and turning it in even more so than ever into harbors for money laundering. So I want to conclude here again, going back to a speech from, or a statement from Lyndon LaRouche, very briefly. You can put it up on the, put it up as our next slide or concluding slide here, and we'll open up things for discussion. Here we are. This is 1981. So this is 40 years ago, you know, basically roughly today, 40 years ago. This is from a paper that by LaRouche, systems analysis is white-collar genocide. So here's the quote, a brief quote. If the policy making so directly and indirectly governing the society's aggregate policy of practice is governed by linear thinking, the effect of decisions within affected institutions and households of the society will be to impose a linear model in the internal actions of the economic process itself. Think about what's happened to education. Since a linear model, a no-growth model, since a linear model is a model causing stagnation and the onset of devolutionary spirals in actual economies, so the prevailing delusions and practices of the university economics departments and professional economists are the principal cause for depressions and other most unpleasant developments in modern history, especially over the course of the period since 1871, 1879. This is the Species Resumption Act. At the point the British system achieved decisive world domination at the expense of influence of the American system. This is already half the proof that global systems analysis analysis as white-collar genocide, the full title of his paper. This is only half the proof that global systems analysis is intrinsically genocidal, but only half. To the errors we have so far identified, the British system, the modern British Empire, the British system adds a vicious element to which we turn attention next. So I'd like to conclude there. The subject of the British Empire is the subject of a book by Robert Ingram titled The Modern Anglo-American Empire. And there's much material on the British Empire, but the globalization itself is centered in the modern British Empire. The gold fix, the daily gold fix, the metals market, the global derivatives market is centered in London. We can go on and on. And that is the enemy. So I turn it back over to you, Susan.